Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Bufnagle the podcast, where we explore entertaining and enlightening discussions of the adventure of life and all things good. From science and technology to history and philosophy to leadership and success. We hope to give you a better understanding of the world and skills for everyone to pursue their own adventure.
Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Bufnagle the podcast, where we talk about all things good and the pursuit of the adventure of life. I am Rafe, and we got a great show today. Zach is out of the office, but I have a special guest here today, America's favorite rocket scientist. You guys all know him, Bob Luzenski. Bob, how are you today?
Rafe, I am doing fantastic. I continue to enjoy retirement after almost a year. And I have to tell you that, a lot of friends I had who were already retired would say this, but I don't know how I ever had time to work. It's just so, I have managed to fill my days with things I have to do, of course. There's still bills to pay, there's still going to get groceries, but most of my time is spent doing whatever it is I feel like doing that day.
I hear you, and I may be joining you shortly. Time will tell exactly how that works out, but a stage of my life may be coming to a close and another stage may be opening, but that's a topic for another day.
Well, I highly recommend it.
You had said before, I recommend it for everyone, I think is the quote
Yes.
that you had. So before we go any further, hey, thanks to all the listeners. We're glad you guys are here. Thanks to you. We are a global top 10% podcast. You can reach us, obviously, at bufnagle@bufnagle.com. We're all over the internet. You know that's spiel. Hey, if you are new to the podcast, welcome. We're glad you are here. Hey, give us 4 episodes or 40 episodes or 440 episodes, whatever you want. We'll give you something that will resonate with you and give you a reason to come on back. And remember, tell a friend to listen and you get a free episode, and subscribe. Hit the 5-star button. Leave us beautiful, wonderful words that will make us sound wonderful to people who haven't met us yet. And we will all be happy because I will get pudding and Zach will get brownies. All right, Bob.
Yes, sir.
You are retired. So I got to ask you, how was this retirement that your retirement started earlier this year, and in early November of 2022, we went through this, the dreaded time change for the daylight savings time. How did that impact you?
Almost not at all. What was most interesting about the time change this year, being retired, both in the spring and now here in the fall, is I really didn't change what I did relative to the sun. I got up at the same time, but not on the clock. By the sun, I got up at the same time, and I would go to bed at the same time. And so, for the first time in a very long time, the time change was basically a non-event for me. And since I already try really hard not to schedule things in the morning when I do have something that's scheduled. It really didn't have an effect at all on me. I tend to be a night person rather than a morning person, so I tend to go to bed late and get up late, and this was just, made the difference between getting up at 9 or getting up at 10, right? It
was inconsequential.
Matter. Yes.
Well, see, and I started thinking about that because we've talked about this because both you and I are very far west in the Eastern time zone in the United States.
Yes.
You are in Michigan, I'm in Indiana, and in Indiana, at least where I am, and other places west, it's even worse. When we're on daylight savings time, the sun stays up till like forever, and it takes forever to get up in the morning. And when it comes into early November, late October, early November, the sun is not coming up in the morning till after 8 o'clock. And that just became really problematic for me. So what I started doing, at least mentally, is I started I would look at the clock. I'm sitting up at night. I'm reading. I'm watching the ball game. I'm prepping for pack. I'm doing whatever I'm doing. All right. And I would look at the clock and it would say 11:15. And I would kind of groan. I'd be like, oh, it's 11:15 already. I got to get to bed so I can get up. And then I was like, well, it's 11 o'clock Eastern Daylight, but it's only 10 o'clock Central Daylight. And then I was like, oh, well, that's all right. And then the next morning would come and I'd be struggling to get out of bed at 8:05. And I'd be like, it's 8 o'clock. It's 8 o'clock Eastern Daylight, but it's only 7 o'clock Central Daylight. So mentally, I had kind of pushed myself onto Central Time. I would still observe. I would observe that I'm an hour late on Eastern Time, but I'm right on time if I was on Central Time. And then I started asking the question, okay, so where should I be? What is
Rafe Standard Time?
What is Rafe Standard Time? Okay, and that's something I want to walk through with it. Now, I made some notes here about how the time zones partition the daylight and how they determine what time it is where. All right, and everything. So I'm going to walk through that how standard time works, and then we'll say a little bit about daylight time and it's really not that complicated once you present how everything is. And then I want to go to the concept of Rafe Standard Time, Bob Standard Time, and Zach Standard Time, and we'll lay all those out and come up with a way to deal with those things. All right. So the first thing is that there is a prime meridian that goes through Greenwich, England. Right. And is.
Do we know why it goes through Greenwich?
Well, because the options were pretty much Berlin, Washington, Paris, and Greenwich. Right. And there was a meeting and they decided like this is like late 1800s, early 1900s,
okay.
Something like that.
I was going to ask when this happened.
To quote a favorite book of mine, prior to the invention of the locomotive, pretty much nothing on the planet moved faster than a horse.
Wow.
So,
yes.
And that's, and people say, well, falcons can dive at 100 miles an hour. I was like, yeah, but nobody's riding a falcon.
Right, exactly. You can ride a horse, but
you can ride a horse.
No,
right.
Riding a falcon seems problematic.
So if you had a time in a town, and towns were generally pretty small units, then I always put it this way: the guy with the watch, he set the clock, and then they rang the bells when you prayed in the morning and when you prayed in the afternoon, and they did it at noon. And if you had to have a thing like a town meeting or something like that, they'd be like, well, we'll do it at 7 o'clock, and nobody said local time, because that's all there was local time. And then the trains came through, and the train would leave Baltimore. Then the algebra problems came in, right? The train leaves Baltimore at 6 o'clock. What time does it reach Pittsburgh? And all right, but the question was that the sun moves, right? The sun moves east to west. Now we can talk about the sun stays still and the earth. Okay, it doesn't matter. The model is the sun moves east.
Actually, if I may point out,
all right, go ahead.
It's all moving.
That's a good point.
The sun doesn't stay still. The earth doesn't stay still. The moon doesn't stay still, nor does any of the rest of it. It's all moving. Just had to point that out. I've got my America's favorite rocket scientist credentials to keep here.
That's right.
In this conversation.
To quote one of our favorite physicists, it's all relative.
That too.
In a special kind of way. All right, so
yeah,
we're not.
I saw what you did there.
Yeah, we're not going to. Okay, so all right, so the sun goes east to west across. So morning comes earlier on the east coast of the U.S. than on the west coast, and we're going to focus here on North America. And I hope the rest of you guys can keep up. But it's not really difficult. It works really nice in the U.S. because we have four time zones, and they're pretty well laid out, pretty even. But there are issues. So there's a prime meridian in Greenwich. Oh yeah, and the reason it's there is because they had this meeting, okay, and the Germans didn't show up, so Berlin was off the table. And the Americans conceded because they were like, well, we could have the prime meridian go through Washington, D.C., which is what they wanted. But they realized that produces bad things, okay? It produces, like, it makes everybody have to redraw all their maps, right? I have a map in my study that has two sets of longitude on it. It's a map of the U.S., North America and the U.S., and it says on the top, it says degrees longitude west from Greenwich. And on the bottom, it says degrees longitude west from Washington. It has them both on there. And this is from the mid 1800s. Huh. And so, I mean, but you know what? you got to pick a starting point, right? So then they came down to Greenwich or Paris, and the Brits said, well, we think it should be in Greenwich because we're the world superpower, and all the maps in the world use our system. All the everything in the world right now is already on this system, and we understand that you guys like Paris, but we it'd just be easier if we just kept it at Greenwich. And the French responded with, well, have you ever been to Greenwich? Have you seen that place? And they were like, it ought to go through Paris, right? It ought to go right through the observatory in Paris where all this great stuff was happening. And Paris is 8 minutes east of Greenwich. So the difference there was really small. It was 8 minutes. It was like 2 degrees of longitude. It was it's nothing. It's not very much, but it's enough to matter. And then the other thing is that if you put the prime meridian at Greenwich, the international date line on the backside, because by this time the world was round, Bob.
Thank goodness.
Yes. Okay, so you put the international date line on the backside, it pretty much goes through all water. Now, it's not exactly right. There's some things around Alaska with the Aleutian Islands and all that kind of stuff. But Greenwich works pretty well, although it's not as flashy as Paris. I'll give you that. So in exchange for the French conceding that there would that we'd put the prime meridian in Greenwich, the committee allowed Poincaré and his friends to revisit metric time.
Metric time?
Metric time. All right. So
what the heck is that?
Metric time. Well, French Revolution, roll yourself back 100 years from that, late 1700s. The French decided we got to get rid of everything. We have new things. We have meters, and we have liters, and we have kilograms, and
meet the new boss. Okay.
Yes, yeah, that's right. There's a new sheriff in town, as they say. All right, and one of those things is and they changed the calendar too, right? They stopped using the Gregorian calendar. They came up with new names for the months. They redefined the week. They did they were throwing everything off. We'll have an episode about
that. You need
French
an episode
Revolution.
on that.
Yes,
Absolutely.
we do. But one thing they wanted to do was they said, why do we divide the day into 24 hours? That's silly. Why would we do that? And so they said we should divide it into tens. And I don't remember. We can look it up. It doesn't really matter. It's either 10 hours across the whole day or 10 hours in the morning, 10 in the afternoon. I don't remember which one it is. But so they had 10 hours and then 100 minutes in an hour, 100 seconds in a minute. And then you could it was different. And you can go on the internet, I think, and you can go to auction houses and stuff and museums, and you can find metric clocks where they don't go 12 at the top all the way around to, all 6 at the bottom, 3 in the 9, right? They go 12, they go 0 at the top or 10 at the top and 5 on the bottom and 2.5 on the side. I mean, they just split it up different.
Oh my.
Metric time.
Wow.
Yeah, I didn't really catch on.
No, apparently not.
Okay. All right. So the prime meridian goes through Greenwich. Okay. And what we're going to do, and there were a lot of proposals about this. How should we divide it up into somebody figured out that if you take 360 degrees around the sphere and you divide it by 24 hours, then each little 24-hour period is 15 degrees of longitude.
I like nice round numbers.
Well, and that's a really nice thing. That's a nice thing to do. All right. Now, and you could argue, I'm sure the French would argue, why do we use 360? Why don't we use 100? And they have a perfectly good argument. We could use 100, but we don't. We use 360. So you take 360 divided by 24 and you get 15 degrees. So we're going to start with this premise that we're going to divide the globe into 24, I'll call them vertical stripes. I think there's actually a word. Is it a sector? Is it a sector of a sphere?
I'm not sure, but yeah, it's a slice. Yeah.
Yeah, it's this vertical slice. And of course, at the poles, it gets pointy, right? It converges at the poles. Yep. But it's 15 degrees wide. So the sun moves 15 degrees every hour.
Yep.
Okay. And you know what? You can use that to your advantage when you're out on the golf course and you don't have your watch, which is something I know happens to you a lot, Bob.
It does, as I'm an avid golfer.
And you often don't have a watch.
And I often don't have a watch. Actually, I always don't have a watch, but I have this.
Because you're retired.
This fancy, because one, I don't care about the time, but two, I have this fancy modern gadget called the phone that they call a phone nowadays, and it tells me what time it is.
Well, what you can
And it
do,
even tells me when I have to go do something if I put it in my calendar.
it just beeps if you put it in your calendar and you have it set to the right time zone.
Yeah,
Yeah.
which it does by itself.
That is magic.
Yes, it is.
That's how it works. Okay, so you're on the golf course and you're like, the sun is starting to set, and you're like, I wonder how much daylight we have left. Right? That's what you do. You hike,
Okay.
right? That's what you do.
Yeah.
So what you do is you take your arm and you extend it out in front of you with a fist like this, okay? And you put the bottom of your fist against the horizon, and pretty much every fist that you go up is about an hour of daylight.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, a friend of mine who's a good golfer taught me that on the golf course, because that was exactly the question we had. And so I use that if I'm out taking a walk. How long till we have? Yeah, okay, give or take. Now, is that exactly? I suppose you could buy a machine.
It's definitely an approximation.
Yeah, but you know what?
But in astronomy, we've used we have, when I worked at the planetarium way back when, we would use that as an approximation for a number of degrees if we were looking for something above the horizon by a certain number of degrees. And I think a fist at arm's length is about 5 degrees.
5 degrees. I think it's close to about 15. Anyway, but
I could be wrong.
Well, whatever.
I've slept since then.
Well, I use it, and it's always good enough for me. So, but
there you go.
There's an idea. So, whatever you do, you need a width out there that is a certain number of degrees.
Sure.
And if you have small hands, it's probably less. If you have big hands, it's more, and depending on the length of your arm as well. But there you go. But there's a way to approximate that if you don't have your protractor or your iPhone handy, and you can tell how much sun that you have left. So, the sun goes 15 degrees an hour. All right. So it seems to me like every 15 degrees or so, we should shift the clock back an hour, right? So if we're going to move west from Greenwich, every 15 degrees, we should turn our clock back an hour so that when our clock says noon, the sun is overhead, in finger quotes.
Within plus or minus half an hour.
Yeah, half an hour. And the reason it's half an hour is because we divided it into 24. If we divided it into 48, we'd be within 15 minutes, right? Right. So what we get is these little bands of 15 degrees all the way around the planet, right? And the first one is centered at 0. And then the next one's centered at 15, and the next one at 30, and then 45, 60, 75, and 90. All right. So you're probably saying, okay, this is getting a little complicated. Where are these little sectors? Okay. So the first one is 15 degrees around Greenwich, right? So that includes like Dublin, Ireland, is at 6 degrees west. So that gives you a picture of about how far that is. I mean, it's a pretty big swath if you look at it in some of these places. All right,
it's a 24th of the way around the world.
It's a 24th, right. So if you go 3 of those over, you are at you're at 45 degrees, all right, which is 1/8, right? So it's an eighth of the way around. That's where like the tip of Greenland, that bottom tip of Greenland is at like 44 degrees west. So Greenland sits almost centered right on 3 hours behind Greenwich.
Okay.
So that where Greenland comes down and makes a little point at the bottom, that's at like 44 degrees west, which is pretty much the middle of the -3 time zone. And then the next one you get to is what's called Atlantic time. That's 4 hours off. That's at about at -60. And that -60 thing is somewhere between St. John's, Newfoundland. Actually, I think it's called St. John's, Newfoundland and Labrador now. I looked it up.
Okay.
And the East Coast of Maine.
I didn't hear about that.
Yeah, so the East Coast of Maine is like 67 degrees west. Okay, so if the center of the time zone is at 60, then like the demarcation between that time zone and the next one will be 7.5 degrees, right? Half of 15.
Yes.
All right, yep. So the East Coast of Maine is right about on the border between 4 hours behind and 5 hours behind. Okay. And so if you wanted a waypoint for 5 hours or 75 degrees off from Greenwich, that's pretty much Philadelphia. Philadelphia sits almost in exactly 75 degrees west of Greenwich, which puts Philadelphia right about the middle of the Eastern time zone.
So from the east coast of Maine to Philadelphia is one half of the Eastern time zone, and mathematically it's one half of the Eastern time zone. So that
Right.
works out really well.
That is really well. Okay. So, and then if for those of you playing along at home, St. Louis is 90 degrees west latitude. Oh, actually, it's Belleville, Illinois, but St. Louis is like a little bit more than 90 degrees west. So that means like a quarter of the planet is between Greenwich and St. Louis.
Oh, cool.
Okay, so St. Louis is like the center of the central time zone. Denver sits almost exactly at minus 105. Okay, so Denver is like the center of the mountain time zone, and the center of the western time zone is that vertical boundary between California and Nevada sits right at 120 degrees west latitude. So those are your center points of these time zones. Now, if you do that, all right, and then you start numbering these things, that eastern time zone sits 5 hours behind Greenwich. Central is 6, mountain is 7, western is 8. Okay, so I am in Indiana, Bob. I am just north of Indianapolis, and Indiana observes Eastern time because it is in the Eastern time zone. But we are, like, I looked it up today. My longitude, where I'm sitting right now, give or take the precision of the pointer on the computer, is at minus 86.16 degrees. So it's more than, well, it's past the 82.5, which is the
Certainly.
boundary.
Yes,
Right?
that's what I was thinking. It's several degrees past 82.5.
And it's only 4 degrees off from St. Louis. All right, so we're only 4 degrees of, like, okay, so the question is, what time should it be here is the question. Right?
Yes.
What should be the time here?
And that is both a technical question and a political, may not be the right word, but social, a social question.
So and I don't want to rip too much on the time zones, because you got to have them, and they have to have boundaries. You got to have a boundary somewhere.
Yeah, and the boundaries for the states were made without, in most cases, regard for time zones. They were made with regard more for geographical reasons.
Yeah, and so I can understand Indiana's got to make a choice. Do we want to be on Eastern time, or do we want to be on Central time, or do we want to split it vertically down the middle? Which means you would split Indianapolis right down the middle, which seems to me like that's probably not a good idea.
That's problematic. And in fact, I remember as a kid, when we get to daylight savings time, but Indiana didn't practice daylight savings time. And we'll get to that. Let's hold that thought until we get to daylight savings time.
So I am 86 degrees west from Greenwich, right? Which puts me approximately 75% of the way across, between the center of Eastern and the center of Central. I'm 3/4 of the way across. So in the hour it takes to go from the sun directly over Philly to the sun directly over St. Louis, it takes about 45 minutes before it's right over my house for me to wave. Okay. So it seems to me that if I want to set my clock such that the sun will be overhead, now I use overhead because I know it's going to still be south of me, but for the sun to be overhead at noon, then I should set my clock approximately 5 hours and 45 minutes earlier than Greenwich time. All right, so at UTC minus 5:45, Zulu time minus 5:45 will put me the sun over my house at noon.
And so the practical effect of not doing that and instead having your clock set to Eastern Standard Time is what?
It's that the sun is directly overhead at about 12:45 instead of noon.
Okay.
All right. Now, you can argue, it's like, well, at that time of day, there's not a whole lot of difference there. But, it's 45 minutes. Like
in the morning. It's 45 minutes in the morning, and it's 45 minutes at night when the sun goes down.
On average, it's 45 minutes.
Yes.
Okay. Yes. And that's where it gets problematic, is because in the summer, it stays up really, really long. We know that because we're in the Northern Hemisphere in our summer. All right. So our sun doesn't go down till like after 9 o'clock in Indiana. All right. When we're on daylight, we'll get to daylight time in a second. But so we're always a little bit behind there. But I understand somebody's got to be behind, somebody's got to be ahead, and it's going to be an issue. But if I don't want to deal with that, I could set my clock for 5 hours and 45 minutes for UTC or Zulu minus 5:45, so that I get sun overhead at noon if that's what I want. Now I got to ask myself, why in the world do I bother setting my clock to a standard time, whether it's daylight or standard? Why do I pick that? And the only reason I pick it, Bob, is so we can do what we did today. It was like, we're going to record a podcast. Let's meet at this time. And if you're going to meet somebody more than a 3 or 4 minute walk away,
yes,
then you probably ought to set up some sort of standard by which, we'll meet after the bell rings at the local church, or after the train leaves the station, or whatever common time element
that worked back in the day. But now with this global world we live in, with global communications, where I might be talking to a friend in Romania and they're a third of the way around the world for me, or I'm talking to someone in Mexico who, it's not as far, or I'm talking to someone on the West Coast of the US, yes, it does make a difference, and we have to do something.
So there has to be a standard. And I'm going to so there's a couple of things. So, and then now daylight savings time. If we go to daylight savings time, at least here in the US, from sometime in March to sometime in November, we turn the clock ahead 1 hour. So what happens is people who are in Central Time, instead of being 6 hours behind Greenwich, they are now 5 hours behind Greenwich. And people in Eastern Time who were 5 hours behind Greenwich are now 4 hours behind Greenwich, and people on the West Coast instead of 8 are now 7. And you know what?
Again, the practical effect is that the sun, rather than on average being on the meridian, being highest in the sky at noon-ish, plus or minus half an hour, is now one, in that same position at 1. So it basically shifts the daylight against the clock. It shifts it later.
So what it does is it makes you get out of bed earlier in the sun.
Yes.
And because you get out of bed earlier, you tend to go to bed earlier, but you finish work earlier. So you have more time after work to go play outside.
In the daylight.
And you know what? And this is where I start, bristling a little bit with people telling me what to do, because that, Bob, I'm not much for,
You're not much for that. No,
yeah,
most of us are not.
Yeah. And
you can suggest things. I'm good with that. But
I'm very good with the suggestions.
Don't tell me what to do.
So, and I looked this summer at one point at the height of summer, and we were 111 minutes off from mean solar time. 111 minutes.
That's almost 2 hours.
It's almost 2 hours.
Just
so
saying.
the sun was overhead at 2 p.m. All right. And if you have a 15-hour day in the summer, like I guess at the height of summer, do they get that long? 15 hours, 14, 15 hours, something like that? Yes.
It's been a while since I've looked at that, but yeah, that's along the lines of what it is.
Then you're going to have sun setting like after 8:30 at night, and people say, "Oh, it's great. I just don't like." People said, "I don't like the sun to be going down when I'm coming home from work," and I'm like, "Well, just go to work earlier." I don't.
Easy for you to say.
Well, it is easy. No, you're right, and that's the thing. It is easy for me to say because I work. I work with people on the West Coast, mostly on the West Coast,
yes,
through my job. And we were talking to a lady the other day, and she had scheduled a meeting for 7:00 Eastern time. And I was like, really? Because that's Jeopardy comes on at 7:30. It's tournament week, and but. She said, I'm in Chicago. I typically observe, she was very very good with her words on this. She said, I typically observe Central Time, but for this week, because I'm doing stuff with your company, I just put myself on Pacific Time. And I thought to myself, well, yeah, well, good. Why not? Why not do that? What, you can do that. And like, I've mentally been putting myself on Central Time. And so so here's the thing, folks, you can put yourself on whatever time you want to be. You can get up whenever you want. You can go to bed. You can set your clock for whatever. The only thing that matters is when you schedule a meeting with somebody, you got to make sure you're there on time.
Yes.
All right. So you do that, Bob. You set your, when you have meetings,
I don't set my clock. Let's start there. I don't observe an alarm. I don't set a clock, except if I have something that I need to go to in the morning. And morning to me is defined as no earlier than 10 a.m. will I schedule something. So 10 a.m. Eastern time.
Eastern Standard.
But I have done what you described, because once I had to, for work, I had to participate in a meeting, a week-long meeting that was going on in Germany. And so I had to shift earlier by 6 hours or close enough. So that had me getting up at like 1 a.m. Eastern time, my time, which, if you're the woman you talked about who's shifting from Chicago time to California time, that's a couple hours and it's in the right direction. Right.
Well, look at it this way.
I can stay up later. Easy. It's easy to stay up later. It's why jet lag is a thing, especially going towards the east, is because you got to get up earlier.
Well, I'll say this. Okay. So when you went to Germany time, they're like at UTC +1, right? Or maybe +2.
Yep.
Right. So think of it this way. You just went onto super daylight savings time. And
yes,
think of it. When the workday was over, look at how much daylight you had.
But I had to go to bed as soon as it
was dark. Well, see, that's the whole thing. It's like, if daylight savings time is such a great idea, why don't we just everybody go to work at night? And then when the sun comes up, then we're done, and we can have the whole sunshine. Look, we can save all this. That's daylight super saving time.
All right, I want you to get that on the ballot and see how many people think that's a great idea.
Well, if you support the idea that more daylight is better in the summer after work, if that is your premise, then you know what? That what I just proposed is a natural, rational conclusion.
It's also referred to as argument to absurdity. Just saying.
It's something I do very well.
Yes, I've known you for a long time, and I know that that's a skill you have. So, there is an argument for not quite going to that extreme, and that's where we get into this whole conversation of daylight savings time, and what we do in the summer and why. And there's all kinds of reasons why we do what we do, and certainly. I remember when when I was growing up, and it happened to be in the late 60s.
In Michigan.
In Michigan. Michigan did not go on daylight savings time at that time when the rest of the country did. And Michigan and Indiana were both in that where we stayed on standard time all year round. So
in the winter you matched with New York, and in the summer you matched with Chicago.
Yes, exactly. Okay. And I remember that specifically because the all the history books say that the Apollo 11 launch was at 9:32 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time, but I remember the Apollo 11 launch at 8:32 Eastern Standard Time. So, or
Central Daylight Time.
Well, or yes, but to me it was, for me in Michigan, we were on Eastern Standard Time. We didn't switch.
Yeah. So
part of that is because the entirety of Michigan should be in the central time zones, and there are historical reasons that we're not when the time zones were set up.
So that boundary at 82.5 degrees west, that almost the entire state is in is in there?
There's a little sliver over by Port Huron on the very eastern edge of Michigan that is properly an Eastern time zone, but the rest of the state should be in the Central time zone.
Yeah, I hear you. I think it's kind of silly. And I know there's discussion. Everybody says they love daylight time, so therefore we're going to stay on daylight time year round. And you know what? If you want to do that, I don't really care. But we shouldn't tell people that the sun is overhead at noon. Then we're going to have to change things and say, no. We put the sun. We set our clock so the sun is overhead at 1.
We should do something about this. There's a lot of people that are asking the question, why do we change the clocks? Right? Because to me, there's a difference between are we on, quote, daylight savings time or not? And do we shift the clocks in the spring and the fall? Okay. I think there's hardly anybody who you could ask who likes changing the clocks, right? In the spring, you do that and you get, you have to get up an hour earlier than what you were. I know I didn't like it when I was working. I don't care now because I don't change what I'm doing now that I'm retired. But, if you've got to work and you got to be there at a certain time, yeah, you got to get up an hour earlier. And, your dogs and your cats are going, dude, what are you doing?
Why are you getting up in the middle of the night? It's dark.
What are you doing here? This makes no sense, right?
What are you on Germany time or what?
Yeah. And of course, then in the fall, it's like, dude, get up. I'm hungry. Right. So,
well, and that, yes.
And I've often wondered that, back when I was working and had dogs, and, it's like, what do they think? They got to think we're nuts here. Just suddenly we start getting up an hour earlier.
Yeah, I don't have any. I guess I don't understand. I've never understood it. I think if you want to do something when it's still daylight, schedule it from when the daylight is. I don't understand why we change the whole clock.
So there's different options, right? I mean, one would be to say, yeah, if you want more daylight, get up earlier and go to work earlier. But, not everybody has that option. Some people work and they have fixed hours.
Well, I saw that. Like I'm on Eastern time now, and in Nashville we were on Central time. And everybody in Nashville, I mean, all the standard work hour is 8 to 5 with an hour lunch. So that's the thing. It's 8 to 5 an hour lunch. But so many people that I know on the East, they don't go 8 to 5. They go 9 to 6.
Yeah, that's what I worked.
And I'm like, well, it's the same thing we're doing. Like you're
literally
ahead,
at the same.
But now they line up.
Yeah.
So is Central time getting up early? Maybe Central should go 9 to 6 too. Right. But they kind of line up and the TV, I think we do all this so we can all watch TV. I think, it's the only thing people know about time zones really is like in the NFL games start at 1 o'clock. The early games start at 1 o'clock Eastern and 4 o'clock, and the late games at 4 o'clock, which puts them at 10 o'clock and 1 o'clock Pacific. And, so that's how they do time zones. And I'm like, But if the Central guys are going 8 to 5 and the Eastern guys are going 9 to 6, then they're all doing it at the same time anyway.
It's basically the same thing. And for me, even before I was retired, since I'm not watching television, I don't watch television in that way. I mean, my focus is rocket launches. So the live things I watch are rocket launches, and they come anytime during the day. And so, or when I'm practicing my hobby of amateur astronomy, that's where actually personally I would like not to be on daylight savings time, for the reason that, I would like to have a little more darkness in the evening so that I'm, it doesn't matter as much to me now, but when I was working, it was really hard to practice astronomy because, if you've got something that's happening in the middle of the night and then you got to go to work the next day, it's tough. It's tough.
I interviewed for a job once in Dallas, and I flew down there, and I forget what time it was summertime-ish. Okay. And I remember I was at the hotel, and the next day I had to go to the place for the interview. And I remember walking from the parking garage to where the office was, and it wasn't very far. I was 5-minute walk maybe. By the time, and this was early morning, 7:30 in the morning. And the sun had already been up for a while because it was 7:30 and they were on daylight time. The sun had been up for a while, and it was I was drenched. I was drenched in sweat, and the high temperature that day was going to be like 108 degrees. It was just
Ooh.
mind boggling. And I talked to a friend of mine who was there for the interview. I said, I was so hot. I said, how do you guys? And my kids were playing baseball at the time. How do you play ball? How do the kids play ball? He goes, well, we just do it at night. They wait for the sun to go down, and like all these youth activities, they have to wait for the sun to go down before they. I mean, and the temperature drops.
Sure. Yeah. Pretty
Severely. Very. I mean,
yeah.
But it's. He said, "There's no way you can do it. You can't have a game at 1:00 in the afternoon, and these kids they'll just evaporate
Yep.
And so I was like, well, those guys actually want, like you said, they would like more darkness, so we can. So there'd be a good opportunity for anti-daylight savings time. You live during the day and do some, and then just sleep all afternoon.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or live at night.
So yeah, I mean, so if you say you still want to be on daylight savings time, but you don't want to switch the clocks, which seems, I think you could generate a consensus around that, right? I think you definitely have a majority of people who would rather not be changing the clocks. Now, we might do that and find out that some of them change their mind after doing that.
After being on daylight savings time in December, they might be like,
yes, and the sun doesn't come up till 10 in some parts, depending on where you are in the time zone. So, so you could go on daylight savings time, but really, if you're saying, like Florida did, and Florida actually had a vote on it, and they decided that they wanted to be on daylight savings time all year round because they're the Sunshine State and they wanted more sunshine.
Sunshine, sure.
Even though daylight savings time doesn't give us any more sunshine, but they, of course, for various reasons having to do with how the time zones and the laws behind the time zones, they couldn't actually act on that, but they did vote on that. But really, if you're saying I want to be on daylight savings time all year round, you're actually saying I want to be in the next time zone over on standard time.
Right. So Florida should just be on Atlantic Standard.
Atlantic Standard Time. And that's fair. I lived in Florida, and I lived on the east coast of Florida when I worked at the Rocket Ranch at the Space Center and the Kennedy Space Center. But and the sun would come up fairly early. So being on daylight time, shifting that a little bit would not be a bad thing. I would understand that.
Or they could just stay on Eastern Standard Time year round, and then if they wanted more sunshine, then they just shift this workout. Just say, you know what, starting April 1st, we're going, and you come in at 7. And people say, oh, I can't come in at 7. It's like, all right, we'll turn the clock ahead. Oh, that's great, perfect. Now I come in at 8. I was like, well, what? It's just insane. It's insane.
Those two are both the same thing.
All right, so
but the real challenge is, how do you pose this question to vote on it? And I don't know how that.
Well, it's taken us 40 some minutes to get our head around what this all means. And
and of course the real answer is, was in the Hitchhiker's Guide, time is an illusion, lunchtime doubly so.
All right, there you go. Well, it's okay. Just so you know, I did calculate Bob's standard time for you, 38 minutes. I don't know if I said that before.
You did not. And okay, that's so
5 hours and 38 minutes. Okay.
So I'm actually 8 minutes farther out of the Eastern Standard Time zone than I should be.
Right. And Zach, because I know Zach's going to be editing this and listening. He is.
Hi, Zach.
He is approximately 13.1 minutes after Central Time. So he is UTC minus 6 hours and 13 minutes. So
okay, so he's within the plus or minus.
Okay, he's right in the middle of that. It's no problem for those guys there in Minneapolis. So anyway, that's where that is. Bob, you know what we didn't get to, other than just a tangential touch and go. We didn't even get to the rockets we were going to discuss.
When you showed me what you had in mind for this episode, I was pretty sure that wasn't going to happen. So, but that's great. This has been a fun conversation about time, and I think we've pretty much used all our time up. So we can save the conversation about the big rockets, including the NASA SLS Artemis 1 which hopefully by the time we record the next episode, will have launched and flown successfully. And also, SpaceX also has a big rocket that they're working on, which hopefully will fly in the very near future as well. And we can talk about both of those because that is a very exciting development in the field of spaceflight.
We love rockets, and we love big rockets even more. All right.
Big rockets are better.
All right. So thanks, everybody, for listening. Bob, thank you for being here as always.
It's a pleasure as always, and I'll be happy to come back and talk about big rockets anytime.
And we will do that. In the meantime, I encourage all of you out there to seek the good, be the good, and spread the good, and enjoy the adventure of life.